Hey guys, welcome back to Enlightened Tale. It's your host Kev here. So in today's video we're going to be doing a reading from this book, which is Laurence Waddell, and it is The Phoenician Origin of Britons, Scots and Anglo-Saxons. Now, we have done some readings from this book in the past. They'll be on the channel somewhere if anybody wants to check them out. And we're going to be skipping a little bit into the book now. We're going into chapter 14. And the reason why I'm doing this chapter is because I was going to read from another book, but then I came across this and I haven't read it fully, but I've seen a number of trig words in here that made me want to read this before I read something else. So this is, like I say, chapter 14, Aryanizing Civilization of Picts and Celts of Britain by Brutus and his Brito-Phoenician Goths about 1100 BC. So the time frame's interesting. Now it does have some smaller tidbits here before the chapter actually starts. Disclosing Phoenician origin of Celtic, Cymric, Gothic and English languages, and founding of London and Bronze Age. And then it has a couple of quotes here, a couple of citations. Brutus called the island after his own name, Britain, and his companions, Britons. And it says Ancient British Chronicles, which I'm sure people watching this are probably aware of. Now this quote's fascinating. The tribes subject to the Kedi, Keti or Getai Goth Phoenicians are skin-clad, and that is from the Rig Veda hymns. So Waddell already here is at the start of this chapter is already showing his extensive knowledge. He's quoting and citing the Rig Veda, which is obviously Sanskrit poems and law and history over in India, where he spent a period of time, obviously Mesopotamia, Egypt and around Britain as well. So he's a quite knowledgeable individual. Whether he's all there and all his information is 100%, I couldn't tell you that. No, I doubt it. But he's done some incredible work. So let's get straight into the quote here, the chapter. This is chapter 14, as I say. The introduction of civilization and the Aryan language by King Brutus, or Brutus, B-R-I-U-T-U-S, and his Phoenician associates into Albion, or as he now called it, Britain, or land of Barats or Barits. Again, this is the Barats, this is the culture, like terminology that he's using here, is described in circumstantial detail in the Ancient British Chronicles, which is confirmed by more or less contemporary and other evidence. The name of the Aborigines, unfortunately, is not preserved in the existing versions, but we have seen that these Aborigines, whose extent, skeletal and other remains date back to the Old Stone Age, were clearly the Picts or British Celts. And the memory of these seem to be preserved in the Scottish version of the Brutus legend. Now isn't that fascinating that this is why, I've done a video about Brutus in the past where I was very early on my journey, and I still am, to be fair. But I started to, it was Geoffrey of Monmouth who made references to Brutus, and Brutus is tied into the genealogy of what we call the Welsh today. I've not seen evidence of this connection going all the way back to Brutus, I have to say, and I have asked the question several times to people who I thought would have the answers, and unfortunately, they've not really provided anything on that front. So it's interesting that we've got this Scottish version, and yet, as we're going to be doing some readings from Coleman's Beaumont, he is more centred in Scotland when it comes to Arthur. You know, you've got a place in Edinburgh, I think he calls the seat of Arthur. He discusses the Round Table and all this kind of stuff, and there's a lot going on there, but I'm sorry to go on a segue, but that is fascinating that we've got the Scottish version of the Brutus legend. It might be something we have to look at further down the line. It's also interesting that he references there that there's no name of the Aborigines. So that raises the question again, who were the original inhabitants of Britain? So this Scottish version of the Brutus legend, which places the newly arrived Brutus, as we have seen on the Sea of Icht, I-C-H-T, or of the Picts, when he banishes from the island his big brother, his kinsman Tiberian Silvius Alba, and his people, who had preceded Brutus in the procession of the tin mines and in the domination of the island. So again, we've got here Brutus's brother. I've not heard that from anyone. I never heard Ross mention it. Maybe if I'd read more Wilson and Blackett's books, they might mention it in there. Like I say, I'm still quite new to all this, but Brutus had a brother who had domination of the tin mines and stuff on the island. Now, isn't that interesting? And significantly, the traditional place where Brutus landed is still reputed the especial haunt of the earth-dwelling darfish or pixies, who we have seen are the memory of the earth-burrowing Picts. The giants who are described in the chronicles as opposing the invasion of Brutus and Quirinius and their Briton followers were obviously not the Aborigines, but, as we shall find from other evidence, an earlier trading branch of the Aryan Phoenicians, the Moru or Amaru or Amorite. Giants and erectors of stone circles and giant tombs, who had been exploiting the tin and copper mines for many centuries and even a millennium or more before the arrival of Silvius and his trading agents, but they had not systematically colonized the land or civilized the Aborigines. Sorry, because I've got bookmarkers in the pages all over the place, so I'm just going to fix that. There we go. But isn't that, again, we've got Brutus's brother Silvius, who came to Britain as part of a trading colony. Probably, if people have seen my Dorians video, as I said, when that migration went from west to east, potentially, you wouldn't have sent your bulk. Everyone wouldn't have arrived at the same time. It's like Maddox when he goes to the Americas. People have obviously got to go there first, be the pioneers, check out the land, see what's going on. Now, I do believe that Brutus potentially was returning back to Britain. And I say back, I don't mean him as an individual, I mean his lineage, his bloodline. If they are connected to Troy, obviously I'm starting to lean towards Troy being in Britain. So if he's going back to his Trojan ancestor, and obviously he's going back to Britain. However, that area of history seems totally lost. Of a Trojan conflict in Britain, of an advanced society in Britain, and as we have here, the Aborigines, they were already in the land. And when he mentions the giants and men of strength, this is something that's going to be key for the next reading that we're going to go on to and subsequent videos down the line, because I want to build up to something quite big in a couple of months. So you've got these Aborigines and we don't even know who they are, but yet here Waddell has made reference to the Amorites. Now, when I'd done the Gog Magog video, initially that was because I found iron ore and then opened the Bible and it was describing a king with iron ore. So that led me on to that investigation. But what was interesting during that investigation, we started to see references to Moses and the Amorites, and potentially could this tie into Britain and all this kind of stuff. And like I say, I'm not going to go off too much of a segue, but this is all going to be relevant in the future. So I'm just going to read that again. The giants who are described in the chronicles as opposing the invasion by Brutus and Quirinius, who's the man who allegedly fought Magog, was it, or Gog Magog, whoever, it was a different name, and threw him over the side of the cliff. The giants who are described in the chronicles as opposing the invasion by Brutus and Quirinius and their Briton followers were obviously not the Aborigines, but, as we shall find from other evidence, an earlier trading branch of the Aryan Phoenicians, the Muru or Amaru or Amorite, giants and erectors of stone circles and giants' tombs. So keep that in mind. Sorry, I just had to put the light on there. So Brutus signalised his annexation of Albion or Alban by giving the latter a new name. He was, as we have seen, an Aryan of the Barat tribe, of which the Phoenicians were the chief representatives, and he had just come from Epirus, where on its Macedonian border was a colony of that tribe, with a town called Phoenice, bearing that tribal title as Partheni or the Parths, Prths, in series with Brutus's own personal name of Perithous. I'm going to spell this out, Peirithous. We have also seen, and shall further see, that the Phoenicians were in the habit of applying this tribal title to their own new colonies. We are now told in the chronicle that Brutus called the island of Alban after his own name, Britain, and his companions, the Britons. The original form of this name, Britain or Britain, was, as we have seen, Baratana or land of the Barats, a form which is preserved in relatively pure form in Dunbarton or Fort of the Bartons, the Dunbreton of the Gaelic Celts. In the Welsh Triad also, where Brutus is called Prydain, son of Ayed the Great, it is stated that he named the island after himself, Isle of Prydain, Innis Prydain. And we shall see that Brutus and his Barats and their descendants covered the country with place, river and mountain names transplanted from their ancestral homeland in Asia Minor and Syria Phoenicia. Now I've got to hit the pause button there. This is where we diverge, me and Waddell, quite significantly. So he's already stated that there was an Aboriginal peoples in Britain, right? And there was already this connection and trading populace before the arrival of Brutus, and he called these people the Aborigines, the original inhabitants of Britain. So we have this, now he states that we have this transference when Brutus comes over of all these names into Britain. Now what's interesting is, if we tie this into Imam Wilkins's work, which I'm trying to build up ideas of all these guys really, so I can cross-reference as much as I can. What we find is that a lot of the river names, for example, a lot of the river names around Troy itself are, and we've discussed this previously and may do further in the future, but a lot of these names are not to be found in the Aegean or in Anatolia. And what's even more fascinating about this is what he's just mentioned there is he mentions there was a tribe of these people in North Macedonia. Now, this is becoming an area now where we're getting a number of arrows pointing towards it, as we discussed in that previous video that it did, the potential east to west, where we discussed the agriculture, farming, domestication, and a few other bits and bobs. What we find is that it's this area of northern Macedonia where they believe like this Alopecis dog come from and potential farming came from, and it's an area where you've got all this ancient agriculture. Now obviously it's in Armenia where, well, I'm giving you some indicators now of where these next couple of videos are going to go. If you look into Armenia, this is supposed to be where we had an expulsion of peoples. People say between in the Caucasus regions, between the two seas. But we'll cover all that in the future. But it's very interesting that he's indicating this this Doric connection that I've mentioned in the past in Macedonia. So we keep moving. And similarly, Brutus's associate, the Phoenician Duke Quirinius, who was probably related to Coruna in Spain, with its legend of Hercules and the Phoenicians, is traditionally recorded to have given his name to Cornwall. We've discussed Hercules in the past. The higher Aryan civilization, which Brutus now introduced and propagated throughout a great part of Britain, began with the establishment of agriculture, which we've discussed, which we have found was originated by the Aryans and made by them the basis of their civilization. The chronicles tell us that Brutus and his Britons set at once to till the ground and build houses. Now there's something I've started putting together as well, which is to do with round houses. Now what's interesting is I wasn't really aware of this, but round houses are a British thing or a Western Celt thing. It's not something that you'd find in like the Hasselt. You know, if you went over into mainland Germany, mainland Europe, Germany, like this Hasselt culture, where we're told in this archaic way that goes back to like the 1800s, that a lot of the culture in Britain came from the Hasselt. Indeed, the Hasselt was the epicenter of which culture expanded out in Europe, and then you had the Latini further south. But what we're starting to find is, like you say, you've got these round houses. They're over in Britain. They're not really found in Germany, you know. And then on top of that, you've got the technology, as I say, that was supposed to be transferred into Britain. So we've got this archaeological evidence that's starting to come out now, where you've got these bronze swords, and the swords that you find in the Hasselt culture, which people believed were the first, are actually based off older British Bronze Age weapons. And then when we start looking at, like I say, the topography of whether there was a conflict in Cambridge, and there will be an archaeological video coming really soon, don't worry about that, we see so much more in Britain than we do in, say, like Hassarlik. And weaponry is obviously a massive part of that. If we're going to start building a thesis around the Trojan conflict in Britain, then there's going to have to be a massive weaponry. You know, obviously these kind of metals back then were a lot more valuable. You've seen a piece of metal lying around back then compared to today. You know, there was a lot of value placed on that metal. It could make you a good bit of money, to be honest, if you were involved in the metal trade and stuff like that. Hence why you had, as mentioned before, Brutus sent his brother. The building of houses we have seen was such a speciality of Hitto-Phoenicians that it gave them, from their timber houses, the title of Kilani, or Geluni, or Giol, Gioln, strange word that, which was horn. I think that says born, bit of a typo there. Also by the Phoenician Barat Partalon. The perishability of timber houses would account for the fact that there seem to be few existent remains of ancient Britain buildings of this early period, except stone foundations, which may possibly be as early as some of the cliff castles, the marvellously well selected strategic sites and defensive military details of which excited the administration of General Pitt Rivers, P-I-T-T Rivers, the great archaeologist. Might have to check that archaeologist out. And some of the numerous towers of the stone masonry or Baroque. Now, I've just mentioned actually a moment ago about round houses. Now, a Baroque is like a stone roundhouse, and it's like fortification, but not like one leveled. There's like northwestern Scotland, I believe, if I'm not mistaken, is the area where you mainly find these brocks, and you can find them scattered about. More so like ancient central England as well, like west of London. But this is something I want to touch on as well in the future. Is like some of these little connections, say roundhouses, brocks, like these really ancient fortifications, or the like medieval, or the Dark Age, or the far more older. You'll have to find out. Suggesting the truly Cyclopean masonry of the Hitto-Phoenicians. Again, so he's stating there the Hitto-Phoenicians built these stone structures, but then there was the wooden structures like your palisades, your posts, and all this kind of stuff. We find remnants of it in the mud, but it's very obviously you're not really going to find any wooden structures that are thousands of years old, especially if they've been like buried and battered with storms, rain, harsh weather, and potentially that little thing called the compact meteorite impact theory, where comet impact potentially wiping out most of Britain. So late as the 4th century AD, Bede write that a house was built after the manner of the Scots, not of stones, but of hard oak thatched with reeds. So there we go, the Scotland connection. This was the above mentioned Hittite timber house presumably. The masonry foundations of such wooden houses were found at Troy. So this would be Hisarlik. Indeed, it seems probable that the artistic timbered style of old masons or mansions and cottages, especially in the south of Britain, is a survival of the famous timbered Hittite houses of the ancient Britons. The building of fine houses by the Phoenicians in Britain must of itself have been a great uplifting factor in civilization of the land which hitherto had known only subterranean burrows. As the Aborigines would doubtless imitate more or less the above ground houses of their new overlords, the pile huts of the few lake dwellings may thus possibly be derived from the Hitto-Phoenician timber house examples. The common Briton affix for towns of Bury, Borough, Berg, as well as Broch, and Sanskrit Pura, which is P-U-R-A, are now seen to be derived from the Hittite or Kati Buru, a Hittite town, citadel or fort. In surveying his newly acquired land of Britain, we are told that Brutus formed a design of building a city, and with this travelled through the land to find a convenient situation. A convenient situation, that's strange language, isn't it? How times have changed. And came to the Thames. As long before Brutus's day, the land had been in possession of the Phoenician Maorites. He referenced the Amorites before, who also traded in amber in the North Sea. The topography of South Britain and its seacoast was probably more or less known to Brutus and his kinsmen followers. The chronicle account says he travelled through the land to the Thames from Totnes. It may be that Brutus, after his single defeat of a leading party of the giant Maorites at Totnes, as he had such a small land force for an enemy's country, at times when the open down permitted, with his fleet in the offing, somewhat as Alexander the Great in his annexating survey of South Persia on his return from India, marched along the northern shore of the Persian Gulf with his fleet under Admiral Narchus in the offing for strategical reasons, which makes perfect sense. We've seen this a lot in the Crusades as well. So there we have it, guys. That's the end of the reading. I want to leave it there because I think we touched on the things that I wanted to touch on for the future video. Like I say, hopefully it should be out by the end of this week. I do plan on getting it out. Now, there's a number of things in here that actually surprised me. Like I say, I'd seen a few trick words, Brutus and a couple of these other words, and I thought I'll come back and read this chapter. Now, I didn't know Brutus had a brother who he'd sent ahead of him to survey the land, obviously look at the mines, and Totnes, I do believe they do have a mine in that area, so it makes sense really for me. What was his name? Tiberian Silvius Alba. So it's an interesting name as well, strong name. And we've also got some other references here. We've got the giants who were on the island, who were not the Aborigines of the island, interestingly enough, which will come full circle hopefully at some point. And these giants, who were they? How did they get to Britain? Why are they in Britain? You know, I say we touched on this a little bit with the Gog Magog video, but allegedly, according to some sources, you know, he was a lone giant who survived by clinging onto the ark and stuff like this. So there's so many different stories, theories, and potentialities. And you know me, never want to rule one out. All doors are open. But this next video, like I say, from Reverend Morgan, he's gonna drill into this a little bit more, and we're gonna see a little bit how it relates to what fed into be the accepted British history. But I'm gonna leave it there. Like I say, I hope you enjoyed that one. There's quite a lot of new information there for me. For yourselves, it might be a rehashing of older information. Alas, we've got much to discuss, and yeah, hopefully I'll catch you in the next video. Peace.